Done. So today we are going to talk about kind Kubernetes in Docker. Right? Kind is actually few of you might be knowing about the kind, but uh, why it really have a significant value in case of somebody who's really new to the Kubernetes but knows Docker, right? So Docker, if you know the containerization, and now if you are trying to understand in Kubernetes, you are trying to excel in Kubernetes. The big challenge is where do I do my labs, and doing hands-on, you require a lab, and setting up a Kubernetes lab requires a lot of resource also, because if you know in Kubernetes the minimum requirement for a virtual machine is 2 CPU with minimum 2 GB RAM, and obviously the 2 GB RAM would not be sufficient, so you need 4. And then you take a you would have an option of doing the virtualization, but virtualization would have lot of overhead on resources. So if you have a laptop of 16 GB of RAM, obviously you won't you you won't be able to create 2, 3 or 4 machines, right? Because in Kubernetes you need at least minimum 2. So resource constraint is also one of the challenge with every beginner, every new learner in Kubernetes. So kind is one of the solution where you can perform almost all your Kubernetes labs in a very good way, in a very well manner, and kind helps you to set up Kubernetes cluster on top of Docker. So Kubernetes nodes in this case would not be like a virtual machine, it would be like a container itself. So this is very lightweight again, and it's for a learning and testing purpose only. Kind we don't run in production. We should not run in production because it's very uh, loosely secured, and on a single system you will be missing the high availability, right, which is always required in production planning. So kind, how we can set it up, what are the prerequisites, how we can get it working, this is what we are going to check today, right? So in this screen, if you see, I have, let's say this is my Docker host machine, single machine, and it will have Docker network also. So if I'm running, let's say, API and ingress and other components also at the same time as a container, how will I connect from outside, let's say? So if you want to connect from outside, based on the design, if you see, my API typically works on 6443, right? If this would have been a Docker container, how would I do that? Then with the pod port to this, I will be doing a kind of netting, right? So I can do 6443 netting to 6443. This is how the netting I'm going to show you. So let's say with here, you can do a netting to here, right? With this one, and then you can have another netting also. That this netting you can do with your ingress to your this Ethernet again. So you can have this netting. So you basically need, this is one port, so you can create this port exposed here. Then you can have here 2 ports in your ingress, 80 and 443. These two would be running. So you can do netting to here, unless these ports are not in use, because if these ports are in use with something else in ETH0, with some other process, there would be port conflict, so you won't be able to use it, right? So this is a way how we can set it up. So netting, if you do, your entire node can start acting like a independent cluster, Kubernetes cluster, and you can be here and you can start performing everything. What we need and how we can do it, this is what we are going to understand. So we are going to do kind in the lab installation, kind, which is Kubernetes in Docker. The installation prerequisites, if we talk about requirement, you need one VM, obviously with Linux, yeah, with Linux, with at least 2 CPU. These are very less, but I know that you would have a Linux at least with higher configurations also. So with at least 2 CPU, and I will recommend 8 GB of RAM, you can create one virtual machine, and there you can run everything. So one virtual machine is what we require. We need Docker CE edition to install there also, right? We need Docker also to be installed and running, and then we need kind binary to be installed, and then we can pop up. It is almost same with RKE1. If you want to understand what is RKE1, Rancher Kubernetes version 1, so if you see my channel, you'll find out video. Okay, so kind binary, one virtual machine, then you install Docker C, then you install kind binary, then again same, you need to write the cluster configuration in YAML file, how and what you want, and then you can simply run kind command to execute the kind Kubernetes cluster installation. It's very easy, it's very simple. So how we can do it, let's try to understand. So I have machines with me. I have only one machine for this one, so VM in my case, and the IP address of that VM I'm taking it as 1.72. On this machine I will be installing everything, right? So if I go ahead here, I think I need to take my machine down first, because this was a last session video which I created. So I just need quickly to restore my machine from a snapshot so that we can get everything as fresh. So I've just run it, and I'm just waiting for the machine to come up. So that's 72. When it will start coming as responding as ping, then I will do SSH into it, and then we'll start our work. So anyways, meanwhile the machine is coming up. Here is the page, GitHub in Markdown, where I have discussed and mentioned everything that working with kind cluster. It's a very good option for those who are just starting with Kubernetes and don't have sufficient enough resources available. So kind is Kubernetes in Docker. It's a binary file using which we can populate our Docker. On top of Docker, we can create multiple node cluster, we can create single node cluster, anything. So first is you need Docker installation. Docker installation, the steps given here you can follow, or otherwise I'll show you. It's very easy. get.docker.com is URL, only thing which you need to always remember, and then rest is fine. So now I'm gonna get into my cluster first. So SSH, and there we go, right? This is my single virtual machine. Let me make this screen a little bigger so that you can see. So this single screen machine, and I hope everybody needs this screen also a little large, the font I'm missing. So I don't have Docker installed here. If you see, now I need to install Docker. I was saying that you need only one thing, so you just need to know the URL get.docker.com, and then redirect it with sudo bash or sudo sh, whichever, and then Docker installation starts. Same thing I executed in RKE1 window also, a video also. If someone is checking on that video, you can find out the same steps for Docker C installation. It's very easy. So Docker installation, I'm doing it here now. My user Vijay is already part of the Docker group, so I would be able to execute Docker commands. Here the installation finished. If I run Docker ps, you see that Docker installation is done and I can run Docker. Now what next? The installation is done. Now I need to download the kind binary. So this is simple step. With curl command I can download the binary, then I can do chmod to make this binary executable in my current directory. Then I have to move this binary to usr local bin so that kind can be my command also. These very small tiny steps, I can execute everything in one go. So the file is getting download now. So if I run kind and then I run version, you see that the kind binary is now installed here, right? Kind version, kind binary installed now. Now you need to create this file, right? And let me talk about this file and I'll give you some examples also. If you see here in kind folder and if you're checking this URL, you'll find out that I have many configuration examples available here. Even in this page also, if you go down, you'll find out many configurations available here, right? At least a couple of them, like this one, right? So I have set up kube proxy mode and other things. So if I take this one and if I do the copy and then I keep here, right? So I'm going in and creating one file. So I'll give any name. So I'm gonna give config.yaml, right? And I'll paste everything here. So let's try to understand what this configuration is all about. So it's a manifest file for kind to accept the values for the cluster configuration. So here if you see kind cluster, this is the API version for it, and nodes, this is a list. So you see that first node, I'm creating only one node in this list. I have only one, right? So role is control plane for this node. If I want to add another node, how will I do that? It's very easy. If you want to do add another node, you can simply add one line here like this and saying that the role should be worker. That's it. If you want to add another node, don't have to do anything. See this one again, right? So if we are creating like this, the number of worker nodes will be created in a container pod. So because it's a pod, so it's not required that you create worker nodes, because at the end the resources will be used from a single container pod, right? And without any quota restriction. So I will be keeping only one node, which is control, which will act like control plane and worker both. So control plane, extra port mapping I am doing. This is a port mapping, guys, with the host and with the container. It means that the pod in this case, right? So in Docker we do the container port mapping to the host. So that's how the container port to the host, that mapping which I was showing in the diagram, if you remember, right? Port 80 to port 80, 443 to 443, 6443 to 604. This is the port mapping with the host. This is a host, Docker host, and this is how the container mapping I'm doing, so that I would be able to access these things from outside network also, right? Same thing. I'm doing two port mapping here, 80, 80, 443, 443 on TCP, and listen address to any, so that any, right? We can restrict from where we want to execute this one also. And then this is a kube ADM config patch. This is a patch which is basically when the cluster will try to initialize itself, then the node registration will give a kubelet extra argument that the node label ingress ready is equals to true. This is require. Why? Because if you want to deploy Nginx ingress controller, then this patch is required. If you don't want to install ingress controller as Nginx, it's fine, you can simply delete these lines. This is okay. Then kube proxy mode IPVS, this requires if you need any modifications, you can do in the networking also. API server address, this is something which I need to change, and I need to make this as my host IP, right? So in this case I will change this to my host IP, which is 1.72. So this will be my API server address. 6443 is going to be the port with mapped to the host port also, right? We are good with this. We are good. So our config.yaml is done. If you go down here, go up here in this case, and kind config, this is also talking about the same thing. So if you're good, then the kind cluster installation requires this command only. So if I copy this command, and since I have config.yaml, so I will give the correct file name here, right? This is, so I'm going to create kind create cluster name. I'm going to give the cluster as kind, and configuration which I'm trying to supply here with this command as an argument is config.yaml. So if I run here, you see that it's trying to ensure that the node image is available. It will, if it is not, it will pull that image from Docker Hub, right? And then it will, after pulling up, it will start spinning up the cluster also. And not only this, but it will do rest of the configuration, like in your .cube folder, patching with the config also. So you will be able to immediately execute the kubectl command. But now the kubectl binary is not available here. That we need to download and set up in this cluster for sure. So it's installing the CNI, it's doing the storage class. We are good. You see how easy it was. If you have Docker and kind binary with the configuration, within 1 minute, right, or 2 minutes, within 2 minutes, it's like Maggi noodle. Within 2 minutes your cluster is ready, right? And it says that now you can run kubectl commands also. I don't have kubectl command, guys. If I run, so I need to install. I can run simply based on the suggestion snap install kubectl, or otherwise I can follow this one, right? So this is a command. With the curl I can download the kubectl binary and I can move it into usr local win, so that it can be my command. Same like kind. So I'm doing running all the commands in one go. So we're good. So now if I'm running kubectl get node, what I see is the kind control plane node is ready. And if I run kubectl get pod in all namespaces, you see that all pods are running, right? And now if let's say with this I will get the storage class also, right? Local path storage class also I'll be getting the ingress also deployed. Now no, the ingress we have to install separately, but we can do it. So if you see the standard, this is the Kubernetes cluster. Now if you want to delete this cluster, right, you can take help from kind, and you'll see that delete is the option, list is option. With kind, if you do a get, right, and then what you want to get, so you can get the clusters here. So if I see get clusters, I have one cluster which is kind, very good. And if I want to tear down this cluster, I just need to run the delete command, and then if I delete, simply delete here, right, then it will ask cluster or clusters. So if I say cluster, right, it's automatically reading the default cluster kind with the name and it's deleting. So if I see here docker ps, I get nothing, and if I run kubectl get node, now I get nothing. So you see that how easy it is to spin up a cluster, remove the cluster. Now if I open, guys, this config.yaml, and as I suggested earlier, if I want to install another worker node, right, let's say I have to just give role worker, that's it. So if I want 3 worker node, let's say, right, 1 2 3 worker node, and I want to spin up the cluster, I can simply say again the same command, the kind create command, right, you see here create cluster, enter. Now what it will do, it will create a cluster with 3 worker node, 1 master. Within a minute you'll get your cluster working, functioning. It's very easy for anyone who is beginner and don't have a lab to perform Kubernetes practices for them. So it's installing storage class, joining the worker nodes. This step was not coming earlier because we had set up only one control plane, no worker, but now this time we have workers also. So it's joining the worker, that's why it's taking a bit of more time than earlier. Cool, we get now. So if I am running kubectl get node now, you'll see here, right, 3 worker, 1 master. So if I run kubectl get pods again, I'll see all the pods are running now, because the proxy and network will be acting like a daemon set, so though will be installed on the number of nodes we will have. Yeah, so this is how we can spin up a cluster. And I have another steps also. If you see if you follow this practice, this one, then we can install now the matrix server, we can apply, we can install nginx also with a simple kind installation, right? If I'm running all these applies, everything will start coming up, yeah, this way. So you see matrix server, started coming up, and we have ingress, nginx ingress also. And if I want to take a watch, I know that this may take some time, so we just have to wait for. You see the controller is up and matrix server is also up. We are very good now. So if I run kubectl top node command just to validate the matrix server is functioning, you see it's working very good. And if I run curl localhost, why I'm running localhost? Because ingress has been installed on the same node, right? So we see that the ingress page also is coming up. So this is how we can set it up. We can start with the kind cluster and other commands also for testing purpose. Kubectl create deploy test, image is equals to nginx alpine. Anybody, sorry, yeah. So if you want to do any practices, you can see, you can do the practices and your cluster is ready to accept everything, right? So this is really a good use of